Welcome to Get Even. Get Even is the podcast where Even founders Ellen and Nora, that's me, sit down with incredible women who've been there, done that in the world of business. Get Even is your backstage pass to their lived experience. You'll hear raw insights, personal stories, and the realities of success. Whether you're looking for inspiration, practical advice, or a peek behind the curtain of what it really takes to thrive, this podcast is for women ready to go further. It's time to get even. Our guest today is Natalie Flynn, founder of Equidi, which is a pay analytics platform. Natalie used her personal and professional experience of witnessing the gender pay gap. She was a senior HR executive, and she used that to found Equidi. And in this conversation, Natalie unpacks the data, the myths, and the realities behind the gender pay gap. You need to be listening to this conversation, whether you're negotiating your next role, whether you're leading a team, or even influencing policy in your company. Really, we all should be talking money with Natalie. She'll share what the gender pay gap is and what it isn't, the most common myths about pay equity and how to debunk them, and the practical steps that you can take to close the gender pay gap. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Natalie. It's so lovely to chat with you on Even today.
Hey, Nora. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to collaborate with Even.
Amazing. So I'm super curious. You've obviously got some big stories to tell with founding Equidi, and I can't wait to hear about your expertise today on the pay gap. But I actually want to start with your personal story and your career story. So can you tell us what inspired you to transition from, a 15-year corporate career in various industries to then eventually founding Equidi?
Yeah, it's a interesting story. I must say, I never sat there and said, I'm going to launch a startup and I'm going to do that. It wasn't something that happened like that. I was very much in corporate, and it more came about from, I guess, my personal experience. So I trained as an org psych and never thought I'd end up working in HR, but I did. And when I got into it, I loved it because I love the diversity of the role. Any day you're kind of doing different things. You're maybe deep in data, doing salary reviews. You might be doing employee engagement or employee experience. And then just, I guess, working with people. I always loved that. So I had a great career in HR, but my dream was to get to the C-suite. So my dream the whole time was to be a chief people officer.
Okay.
And when I finally got there, it kind of played out a little bit differently to what I thought. When I took my first CPO role, it was to the tune of a 40% reduction in pay. The role was paying around, I guess, 40% less than the benchmark for that role. And then it was anywhere between 50 to 60% less than what my male peer group were on. I was told it was caveated with, you need to prove yourself in the role. And so off I went thinking, oh, yeah, well, that's fair enough. I'll prove myself in the role. I was confident I'd be able to deliver on everything I said I would. And I did. I started in the role, and I know the first 3 months were, it was a startup scaling very quickly. And from a HR perspective, there was so much on, and I delivered on everything. And then over kind of a couple of years and having a few discussions around, we need to look at the pay. This isn't, what we agreed, and we said we'd fix it once I'd proved myself. It kind of didn't really happen. So after 2 years, I finally sat back and said, and this is watching people within the organisation come in many layers underneath me being paid more. I had to have, yeah, I had to have and it took a while to get the courage to actually go have that discussion, because when you're in HR, there's no advocacy for you, particularly when you're the most senior leader in that space. So it was a bit of a tricky discussion, but I worked up the courage finally, and I went to the global CEO. I put the data in front of him, showed him the internal relativities, and said, we need to do something about this. And he was genuinely horrified, and he fixed it straight away. And it was a significant pay increase. And then I had a fantastic career with that company, but it just showed to me there was a real big disconnect between what execs can see in real time and then what they need to do to understand pay, because when they're running a business and have everything else going on, pay isn't front of mind for them. So it got me thinking to that. So after that experience, I went and did a bit of consulting work. That was around the time as well. I was doing my MBA, doing some consulting. And a similar scenario played out. And by this time, I felt myself, I've proved myself in the role. I'm a seasoned executive now, but a similar theme played out. So I was asked to come in house to an ASX listed company at the time. They had $1 billion market cap. And the salary discussion came around. It was face to face with me and the CEO, and he made me the job offer. And whilst on a base pay level, it was comparable to the peer group, and I was again the only woman in the leadership team, so the only exec and the first woman exec. And when they offered me they were paying probably at the lower end of the market because of where the business was at that point in time. But they had a very generous LTIP plan, which meant that you were retained for 3 years to see that through. So when that offer came, it was around about a third of what the male peer group were on. And so straight away, I just said, because by this stage I'd had the experience, I wasn't going to be proving myself again. I said, is that what the boys are on? And he physically jolted. I went, what? I said, is that what the boys are on? I've obviously been consulting to you. I know the lay of the land. And he just went and texted the CFO and they went, oh no. So they doubled the LTIP offer at that point in time, but that was then half of what the boys are on. And so I just said to him, that's still not equitable, and basically I won't take the job on those conditions. He goes, oh, if I need to do something about it, I need to go to the board. I said, well, go to the board. I'll accept it at this, but if that doesn't happen, then I won't take the role. So it went around the circus for a little while. I ended up not taking the role. I didn't feel I was fit for that business and where they were at. And so a few months later, I transitioned out of the business. I did build their HR team and transition it across. But they came to me with some questions as to they were having the AGM, and the institutional investors wanted to understand why there was no women on the board and no women on the exec team. So it occurred to me, okay, this is really interesting. I watched the AGM and then I watched the responses from the chairman and the CEO. And again, that real disconnect between where the business was at, what the core data was, and then understanding that for them to get that in a meaningful way, they need to go to the HR team, get stacks of data, understand it by different intersections and different cuts. And it was a really manual process. Whilst in my case, I don't think anyone ever set out to do the wrong thing. I think that it's very hard if you're not an expert in the area to understand the data. And so I went to bed that night and literally woke up in the middle of the night. My partner always says to me, oh, if you wake up in the night, you can talk to me, just wake me up. And so this particular night, I start just tapping him. I'm like, hey, hey, hey. And he's like, oh. And I'm like, I've got this really good business idea. We're talking about this pay, this gender thing, da, da, da. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, what if we had a platform for it? Like, what if HR teams, if execs, if leaders could see it in real time? So you're not going to a payroll system and trying to extract, you're not trying to find it from the HR and piece it, like the HRI system and piece it all together. It's sitting there running all the data models all the way through, and you can see everything across the business in real time. He's just like, that actually sounds really good. And then I just started spinning out. I chewed his ear off for like an hour. And then he finally said to me, okay, this actually sounds good. Why don't you trot off into the kitchen, start working on it so you don't forget your idea? So I'm like, okay. So I jump out of bed, start
Middle of the night.
Middle of the night, yep. Literally, it was by this stage, I think it was 1 a.m. And so I just started working on it. I did some research, like surely there's a product out there that's doing this type of stuff. I couldn't find one. And I just kept researching, thinking what would the product actually do? Like, how do you bring this to life? So by the next morning, I had all these pages everywhere. My partner at the time was on gardening leave from a role he was in, and we both love dessert wine. So I woke up at around 8. I think I'd gone to bed at like 6 or something, and he has a dessert wine glass on the counter, and I walk out going, "Oh no, what's he doing now? Drinking in the morning?" But he was so excited, but he started drawing the homepage of the platform and was using the wine glass to trace all the circles, which are actually still the dashboards in our platform.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was kind of it there. Then just the journey kind of started. Was it technically possible? Could we do what we wanted to do? How much of a build was it going to be? Were people going to use it? Was there a real need, etc.? And the journey just kind of started from there. So it wasn't intentional. It was more, I saw an opportunity. I thought that, if I'm experiencing this, and I'm fairly direct and straightforward and I can advocate for myself, but if it's happening to people like me, it's so much more widespread. And being in HR, you're in that unique position where you're basing this off data because you can actually see it.
Yeah. Wow. I've got goosebumps just thinking about the different parts of your story. And it's also shocking to me that, as you say, you had access to all of the data, and
Mhm.
yet it still required courage for you to have those different conversations in the two organizations.
Yeah, yeah. And when I say for the HR bit, there's a few components of it too, because if it's anywhere else in a business, you'll go to HR and HR will generally advocate for you or your manager, etc. When you're HR, your job success depends on the relationships you have with these key people. So it's a really kind of awkward situation to be in because if that conversation doesn't go well, what's going to happen with your role, etc. So I was really lucky; it did go well. But understanding all the different dynamics as well, because there is the benchmark for the role, the sizing of the role. So I knew that that was where it should be. There's also all the other factors that play into pay equity.
Yeah.
I had top performance ratings every year in that company, so it wasn't a performance issue. It wasn't. It was just an oversight or a lack of understanding with some of it, which is why we saw the need for equity just needing to exist to make this a bit easier and demystify pay for people.
Yeah. Amazing. Actually, tell me more then about equity, and just so where you are now. You're a few years in. How do you typically work with organizations? So is it that the pain point is that there's a lack of kind of insight into the data in real time, as you say, or what's sort of the starting point, and then how do you come in and how do you help?
Yeah, it's a great question. So basically, I kind of describe it as we're like the data layer in between the HRIS and the payroll. And so we provide, I guess, pay insights or pay intelligence to identify where there is pockets of either gender pay gaps in certain areas or pockets of pay inequity. Then we help them close that. And step them through how to do it. We also do reporting out of the platform. So, be that board reporting or WGEA reporting, we're able to produce the two data reports for WGEA. And then we have the strategy side of the platform. So we'll do a diagnostic when the company comes in, understand where they're at on their journey, and then serve them the strategy and the content to go embed that within their business. So it's deep in the data, but connecting that to the overall strategy.
Beautiful. And tell us a bit more about the founding journey, and what did it take for you to actually stand up equity? Was it you and your partner? Did you have to bring in others, or like what did it look like?
Yeah, so early doors, we were just focusing on getting the product built and was it technically possible? Because some of it, I look back now, kind of 3 or 4 years ago, and I kind of laugh at what we thought was so sophisticated for MVP level versus where it is today. um, so we needed to build it, but then the key was having customers in the platform using it to actually keep building the foundation from there. So I guess with the team was, firstly talk to tech. Is this possible to build? Because it's one thing to have your idea and your vision, but if you can't build it, technically, then you can't do it. And so building the team was getting clear tech advice, getting the tech team working on the brand, getting the positioning right. I was very conscious with a product like this. It could be seen as quite controversial. And
Mm,
we were starting to talk about, or creating a new narrative on this because traditionally this has been really taboo to talk about.
yeah,
And a lot of, and it still kind of is. I mean, I see it all the time as well, just the lack of understanding in terms of what this thing is, the gender pay gap and pay equity and the difference between the two. Um, and so getting the positioning right for me was really important in terms of we're not saying anyone's done the wrong thing. We're just trying to work smarter about this because there is a way where with deep data analytics that you can have this at your fingertips and make a better decision every time. Because what I was finding and looking at the rhetoric across the country and even with what WGEA have done is amazing. But how do we stop fixing the pay gap? Why don't we stop creating them in the first place? Because they're human decision points that people are making within a business. And once they are set, they are really hard to undo. And my situation's a good example of that. It took 2 years to fix it because when you set a salary in a company, they see you as that salary point and it's very hard to then
yeah,
go, oh, but we've been paying you this, why would I pay you more when you've been doing the job and a good job, so why would we pay more? And it's just that net logic in it. So what we've done with the platform is try and create some features in there. So at key decision-making points, they're running that through the platform before making their decision. So one of those tools is Pay Gap Predictor. If you're going to hire or promote someone, we have the platform configured. You just enter the specifics. We'll run it through and model out what it's going to do to your overall pay gap, to your like-for-like pay gap for others in that role, to that level across your business, and to your department. So you're looking at it on all these different levels. And so that's we found in the platform that's been game changing for companies making better decisions and the right decisions the first time. And similarly, we have that for the salary review process too. So when the company runs their salary review, so they don't unintentionally make the pay gap go up as part of that, they can run it through the platform first and see what's gone on, and then go back and manage that through the process.
Wow, it's so cool. And I really love, and I'm hoping I get it right now, but I really love the way that you've reframed it as let's stop fixing the pay gap and let's actually just not create it in the first place. I mean, that's kind of game changing.
Yeah, it really is. And it's just because people like you hear about the problem, but it's so hard to get your head around how it might happen. And
Yeah.
so much of my journey as a founder has been market education on this thing. And for me, my personal experience drove and is a good illustration of that. And that's normally what I can lead with. And also just from being in HR, seeing so much of this go on in a business.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't think people intend to do the wrong thing. It's just part of how, a culture is, or part of how the dynamics play out. So I think, yeah, shifting the rhetoric on it is really, really important.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into what are some of the factors that have led to us being where we are now. So I'd love to get your take on the gender pay gap. I'd love to understand, what do you think are some of the contributing factors? And can you help us to unpack the current national gender pay gap, which I think is 21.8%. So we just saw that data published from last year.
Yeah.
Can you, as an expert in that space, can you help us to unpack it a little?
Yeah. I'll try and just cover it, because I think a lot of the confusion with the gender pay gap is also the pay equity piece. So I'll just try and, in simple terms, explain the two, and then also just the WGEA side. So WGEA is obviously the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. They collect the data from any company in Australia with over 100 employees. That's the threshold where you need to start to report. And they aggregate all that data across the country. So their data set is incredible. They've been collecting it as WGEA for, I think, nearly 12 years now. So it's a really awesome data set. And what that means for companies is basically it's what we call an unadjusted gender pay gap. And so that means that they will look at across the company all the aggregate data, so all data from every employee aggregated up. They'll look at it on a median perspective, so looking at the middle point across the company, and then on the average. And so when they put all the data together, their total remuneration gender pay gap at the moment is 21.8. So that's that figure that they're pulling across the country. Yeah. Now, for companies, they have been publishing the company's pay gaps for the second year now. And so it's a raft of really interesting data that you can now look up. So I say to anyone looking for a job or looking to go work for someone, do have a look at what that company is doing with gender equity, because it is important to understand where their pay gaps are at and what they're doing. But one thing I do always caveat with the WGEA data is that it is an aggregate view and it's an unadjusted pay gap. So that means that there's been no controlling for various pay factors that could impact that. And so such as whether, different dynamics will play out. So, are performance ratings impacting that? Are levels impacting that? Is tenure impacting that? Is age impacting that, etc.? So that's what we call adjusted pay gap. So we say WGEA is great as the starting point, but it doesn't give necessarily the context of what's really going on in that business. And every business is going to have different drivers. And so we've seen some fascinating figures come out the last few weeks from the gender pay gap data, because in year one, what I found with a lot of companies, they were saying if they had a large gender pay gap, it's because we haven't got enough women, so we'll just hire more women. And I would say to that, well, that's not necessarily true, because if you just go and hire more women into the lower pay quartiles, you're probably going to get a higher gender pay gap. So
Yeah.
that's not the blanket answer, but you were seeing a lot of, I guess, miseducation on some of it. And so that's because those companies don't understand exactly where that intersection is with pay gap data and where they need to focus. Because, like I said, a blanket approach isn't necessarily going to fix it. And also this week, we saw a lot of even, I was on putting together some industry views on it, but a lot
Yeah.
of the women-led brands as well. So they had some really significant
I
pay gaps.
saw that. Can you give us a bit of a lowdown? So one of the things that I have loved seeing you create with Equity is these summaries of different industries, and then highlighting, like you said, retail, for example, or construction, or whatever the industry is, and then you've highlighted different companies within that. What have been some of the lessons from that?
Yeah, and again, such fascinating drivers in some of it, because, like I said, the fascinating thing about the women's brands was that they were anywhere from between like a minimum of basically 85% women employees up to some of them were like 98%, but some of them still had pay gaps around like 40, 50, 60%.
Yeah.
So all those companies that said, oh, it's really hard to get women in, well, these have the women in there, but they still have massive pay gaps. So for other industries like construction, like mining, they have a lot of, say, other challenges or barriers to getting women in, but their pay gaps were largely not to quite to that extent. So it was a really interesting dynamic of what was going on. But to understand it, you need to see their data sets and really go into it. Because a lot of people were saying with the scenario with the other brands, they were like retail, right? So women are in the retail roles, they're the lower paid roles, etc. But then does that mean that men were more senior and in the higher level roles? It could be. You'd need to know across all those businesses. But there was certainly some dynamic going on that was changing that. So I think in other industries, they have done well with trying to work out what is going on as well and then manage that through and understand it. So it was just really interesting, because everyone seemed to always say we just need to hire more women or get more women or get more women more senior, which is a very common problem. But yeah, that kind of bucked the trend on that, which I thought was really fascinating.
Wow. So it's not necessarily about just getting more women in. It's actually, do you think the problem often originates in, if you think about where women cluster in the workforce, or what women are paid? If you think about, are they more likely to be in certain categories of jobs? Is it, like you said, potentially a leadership thing? Like, what are some of the problems that
Yeah,
actually contribute to the pay gap that you see then?
yeah. It's generally a mix of it all. So yes, there is the problem we see in the national data sets. Yes, as the triangle goes up and the seniority level goes up, women tend to drop off. So there's this kind of perception of this glass ceiling where they'll cap at, maybe manager level, and then moving up. This year, the WGEA data said that exec level cohort is contributing significantly to the overall national pay gap. We know that almost 80%, just short of that, of CEOs reporting in the WGEA data set are men, so 20% less. So you have those dynamics suggesting that trend, that there is certainly a drop off as you get more senior. But for organizations, they really need to get underneath the data, because what I see a lot is not being data driven, just going off the aggregate figures, and therefore chasing the wrong strategy on it. Because what you're going to have is some of the problems when we look at a customer in a platform, we're looking at all the intersections of that. So you have your G numbers, that's all in. That's fantastic. It is literally just the start of the journey, because that does not tell you anything about the dynamics that are going on within your business. We look at it by your departments, by your divisions, by age, by performance rating, by tenure, by pay grades, by ethnicity. If they have the data, we will put all those intersections across so they can be really clear on it. Because you need to know, to the companies that just say, "Oh, we just need more women." I say, "Where do you need women?" Right?
Yeah.
Is this at a level? Is it in, because if you have a business, let's say even in tech, overall the tech industry are 30% women, 70% men. If you go and hire lots of women for your HR team in tech, that's probably not going to solve the problem, because the research suggests that 86% of HR is made up of women. You're just going to go and put them into an area that didn't need that in there. They probably need it maybe in the tech teams, maybe in development, maybe in infrastructure, etc. So they've got to really understand and be clear on that strategy. So when you have that example then as well, if you go to market and you're trying to attract into your business, you're going to run a very different talent attraction campaign to hire women into the tech roles versus women into the HR roles. And so that's where you need to be crystal clear on what you're trying to do. We also see in the platform other bits like looking at gender pay gaps by age cohorts. So the national data would tell us as a woman's age rises, so too does the gender
Yeah.
pay gap right up until retirement. So the only age bracket in Australia that women are paid more favourably than men is from 16 to 19. So straight out of university, that grad level. There's a very
So
slight
it doesn't get better the more you advance. It's sort of the problem kind of widens over the course of the career.
right up to the latest age bracket. So that I think they're 54 upwards is where the pay gap is highest. It's also what I saw from doing my own analysis into the WGEA data. There's a massive exit from women now in those cohorts. So from 55 upwards, stark decline in women. So it was really interesting to look at that. So in your organization, you need to understand is that a thing in your organization? Because again, that will drive strategy. If you can't attract them in, they're going to be very different strategies and you're dealing with different generations. So if you're going to run a recruitment campaign, don't just say, oh, we just need women from everywhere. It's no, we need women in these particular areas in our business at these levels, and we're going to run these targeted recruitment campaigns because we're lacking here, we're lacking there, we need the talent in. It might be in your business you identify that, okay, we have a good spread of representation, but women aren't developing through the organisation. So you'll be very clear on getting a clear strategy. How do we develop and grow our women through the business, and what might we do in there? So even to those examples with the women's brands, whether it be retail side of it or any of that, they have the women there, but is the problem that they're not developing through the business, right? And then when you get to the senior roles, how do you take someone who might be in retail and grow their career? Because I find it hard to believe that they don't want to have an opportunity to grow through the
Yeah.
organization. So being really targeted on that. So maybe in those businesses, maybe that's what they're looking at. Or is it a retention piece as well? So are you losing women at a certain point in their career cycle? And then what can you do to wrap a targeted strategy around that? So that's how I look at it all. And I love data, so I love finding the nuances in this and then going, okay, here it is. This is what you might want to look at.
It's amazing how data driven your business is. And I love, I mean, it's such a smart approach to kind of to help companies not just, come up with these blanket solutions that may not actually fix the problem where it occurs.
Yeah.
Natalie, is there anything else that has emerged in this year's WGEA reporting season? Is there anything that's new in like what's actually being reported? Anything else that we haven't covered?
No, I don't think so. They're about to head into the new reporting now. So from 1 April, we're into this year's reports. So I think organisations are turning their mind to that already and to understanding their figures. One of the great things we built in as well was because we obviously have the WGEA cycle playing out in our business too. What we did was, how do we keep that WGEA view live for the customer at all times too? So at the moment, most companies will report, they'll get their data, they'll load it into the WGEA portal, and then it will show them. But you're right at the end of the journey, and there's not much you can do at that point. So what we've done is we have that in our platform, so customers can see every day of the year where they're on track for their reporting. And again, it's another one of these proactive approaches instead of reactive approaches to be looking at this stuff and having it front of mind, because I hear of so many kind of throw the report over the fence and go, oh no, now we need to do something, and you're a year off having another opportunity to have a go. So that's why I think all of this in real time is really important. From the WGEA perspective, there's not too much changes. I think the biggest parts of the changes are now in there. One of the biggest parts of this year was the inclusion of the CEO data sets, which was very interesting. So that is now included. So all the only on the average view, but that's sitting in there. And for the first time ever this year, they did release the pay quartiles. So what that means is that every business now, you can see their 4 pay quartiles. So it's basically you've got 100% of the business. Here's the top, the 2 middle bits and the bottom, and it will show average total remuneration for the organisation. So that to me was just fascinating to see it out there. I was like, wow, this is incredible. We moved pretty quickly on that. We have a salary benchmark product where people can go look up a salary for what they should be paid. And in there, we pulled that data straight through. So you can now search for a company's pay gap and see their pay quartiles in our platform. And it's just a bit easier to navigate the WGEA system is it's amazing and full of data, but if you need something quick, it's a bit easier to do that. But I think that's game changing in terms of what that insight provides. And on some of the LinkedIn stuff that I've been doing, we're sharing what those average pays were, and some of it's been mind blowing.
It's scary, and I think this is also where it's kind of interesting, because I think maybe, you know, businesses are paying a lot of attention to this stuff because of the reporting requirements, and it does seem to be, you know, sort of more of a live conversation this time of year. But it's actually interesting, I think, when you flip it to, you know, what does it feel like for employees on the ground? And so things like actually having visibility into pay quartiles, I
Yep.
think it's so important. And I do want to ask you about, actually, you know, if we flip the whole lens of who's looking at the pay gap, and let's not look at it through the business lens, but what does it feel like for employees? What do you think? What else? What else do you think individuals who are employees need to know about the pay gap? What do they know about what kind of information they can access?
Yeah.
What other advice can you give us on that front?
Yeah, great question as well. And so, yeah, I hadn't rounded this out because we went deep into WGEA, but the pay equity, so the pay gap, as I said, is aggregate all in, and you have the unadjusted, which is the WGEA, and the adjusted, which we pull through. It's a pretty hardcore regression analysis to work that out. But then you have the pay equity side, and this is another one where people get confused over it. So pay equity is essential equal pay for equal work, and that's been legislation in Australia since 1969. But again, that doesn't guarantee, and a lot of people say, oh, it's legislation, of course this isn't happening. I give a lot of examples that how that might hold true in an organisation that might not actually play out. So I have this example that I use, like Mary and Paul. So they're both call centre managers. They're both on, you know, let's call it, you know, 90K base salary. So to say that you have equal pay for equal work, tick, that's true. But then you lay in the complex remuneration or pay systems in the business, and that's where you see it change. So I use the example that they have their performance review. Paul is considered an absolutely amazing employee. He's contactable any time of the day. You just call him, he just gets things done. He's amazing. Mary is technically as good a performer, really amazing, but she has to pick up the kids, has to leave early, and then sometimes can't take calls at night time. So we'll rate her an average performer. And so let's look at the impact of pay on that. Bonus time comes. Average performer, let's say 3 rating, she might get a $3,000 bonus. He gets a $6,000 bonus, right? So that we have a 50% inequity there. Let's say then that the salary review comes, you know, he might get, you know, 6,000 in salary review. She might get 3 because it's based off the performance. And then their superannuation is therefore going to be different because his total REM is very different to hers. And so that's how you have that play out. So a lot of companies were simplifying this, I think, and didn't understand how, and this is why it's gender pay gap, elements of gender bias can play out through those processes. And so that's always a challenge for companies. So pay equity means equal pay for equal work, but there's also a lot of different dynamics that go on in that. And that's what companies just need to be really aware of, because it's not just as simple as, oh, we have pay equity in this business. And so that's why I just say to companies, yeah, just, you know, understand the full picture when you refer to that.
Yeah. Wow. That is such good advice. What about, so on the individual side of things, so knowing some of these factors, I'm wondering, you know, does that actually impact the level of at which you're informed? And, you know, the more you know about these things, do you think that might impact how women especially can go into a salary review or into negotiating an offer? What are your thoughts on that?
100%. I think that, you know, and I say this as well, and, you know, you've got to be your own best advocate. And it's not always an easy thing to do, and it probably doesn't come that natural to a lot of women. I know for me, it was the most awkward conversation I had to have, and I put it off for so long. So it absolutely is, but you need to advocate for yourself. Like, don't sit there and think that everyone else should be doing it for you, and that's regardless of gender. I'd say that to absolutely anyone. I think arm yourself with as much data as you can. That was part of the reason we put out that salary benchmark product, because I'm like, it's great we're working with corporates on this, but, you know, it is slow moving. How do I put pay in the hands of people so they can start advocating for themselves as well. And so that's why we created that. And that's a completely free solution as well. So anyone can just look it up. But it's just a little guide so they can get a ballpark. You can put your salary in and overlay it. Will show where you're paid in relation to the market, etc. So the more you can find out about, and there are other free tools out there like that too. But the more you can find out about where you think you are, is really useful. I also say have really good work examples. If you want to have a discussion about your salary, don't just walk in and sit there and say, oh, I want a pay review. I think be really clear on what you want and what you're asking for. Go in with your examples of your work. So, you'll have a book of work or your achievements that you've done. Go in and remind people of that because that is not top of mind for people. I think
Yeah.
so many times with leadership, you expect leaders to be all over this and taking care of you and looking out for you. And of course they should, but you also need to be reminding and driving those conversations because often they're leading many other people and you're
Yeah.
not front of their mind all the time. They're also have their own career in it, trying to progress and do their things as well. So go in with the information. Like I said, data, have an understanding of what you're asking for, do the market research, walk in with your achievements. If you have any, if you've been working with different people who will write something nice about you or have those testimonials, bring them with you and have the conversation from that kind of a place instead of just going in and saying, oh, I just like a pay rise, I'm worth more, da da da. Because even when I was on the receiving end of that, when I was in HR, you'd get people walking through the office on it. But oftentimes understanding remuneration can be complex. And sometimes you know people come in, oh, I just heard so and so is getting paid more than me. I'm like, well, first of all, that is just not true. But people are talking about pay in different ways. You don't know if they're talking about their pay in a base salary perspective. You don't know if they're talking about total remuneration. You don't know if they're talking about bonuses. It's all very messy. So don't necessarily rely on what other people are telling you with that. Do your own research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I think there's another thing that I've noticed as well, which is around, I think sometimes people are unaware as well of how um, the pay process works in an organization.
Yep.
So things like the timing at which salaries are reviewed,
Yep.
understanding who are the key decision makers. And it might be,
Yep.
as you said, a leader might have lots of people that they're
Yep.
responsible for. It may not even be a direct line manager who ultimately decides on your salary.
Yep.
So just kind of really digging beneath what actually goes on in order to
Yeah.
make those decisions.
Yeah, and it's such a great point because you probably heard globally there's a big move with pay transparency, like particularly in the US. In Australia, it's been so counter to our culture like that. So basically, up until 2 years ago, there were still pay secrecy clauses in employment contracts, right? So it was ingrained in us to never speak about your pay. Never speaking about your pay gives the companies all the power in that because they know from behind the scenes what's going on. But if you don't know, then how do you know what is fair and what's reasonable and what's an internal relativity, etc.? So I think it is really important. And the companies who are doing really well at this stuff are being open and transparent on that stuff. And there's different levels of pay transparency. And it doesn't mean a company should publish a spreadsheet with everyone's pay on it. It
Yeah.
means that and I have heard of some companies doing that, but not in Australia. But it means are you going to be transparent with salary bands? Are you transparent about how you grade your roles? Are you transparent about your remuneration strategy and how you pay? About your pay cycles, when do we do the review, what's factored in, etc. And so often it's always been the case that no one discusses pay, so it's all behind closed doors, and then as an employee you're at the receiving end of the decision and may not have got any input to it. So I do see that shifting, particularly with the new generations coming through the workforce. It's a new era, and we're going to, whether we like it or not in Australia, it's going to be happening. And so I say to companies now, getting prepared for that now. And with the WGEA stuff going out, your pay quartiles are now out there.
Yeah.
Why not leverage it, right? Start talking about it, start using it, but moving into that more kind of modern side of how we talk about pay, progression, and people within the organisation.
Beautiful. So it's actually, it's interesting because the whole pay side of things is also part around what a workplace culture is like going forward. And I
Yep.
think this is changing into a future of work conversation. So I think it's quite
Yes.
interesting to think about, yeah, what kind of openness do we want as a
Yep.
business?
Yep.
How do we want to treat our employees? Is it a sort of relationship where it's about adult to adult, or do we want to keep them in the dark? I think these are really interesting questions that are being raised by it.
They are, and like I said, everyone's hand is being forced by it now. Like it's no longer an option just to sit there and have, the HR department behind the velvet curtain doing it. Like, it's not how it's done anymore. It totally was for a long time, but the generation is changing, and so I think it's a positive thing, because I think the more transparency we have, the more people can be informed, and then people can make the decisions. But doing this right is a cultural thing. It is absolutely a strategic lever and a cultural lever within an organisation.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, Natalie, just before we finish up, I want to actually ask you on a more personal front. You are now, you're in that privileged position. You're able to reflect on your career. You've achieved so many things, both in your previous corporate life and the amazing work that you do now with equidi. If there's any like great career advice that you've had that's really impacted you in a positive way, can you share it? But also on the flip side, what's the worst career advice that you've received?
Oh yeah, I've had lots of that. um, well, I've had a few. I think one was, which I found really challenging. As I said, HR was my profession, and I always wanted to be a leader. And when I first expressed my desire to do that to a HR director, he was having conversations, and the conversation kept going round and round and round. It would come career discussion time. I said, I really want to lead a HR team. Yeah, you just don't have any experience in it. I'm like, I'm really well aware of that. But if we keep having these conversations, I'll be 60 and still never have the experience, because no one ever let me have the experience.
Yeah.
And so I went around, and I was just like, and I was probably like maybe early 30s, maybe just before that, coming up to that point in my career. The advice to me at that point was, okay, if you want leadership experience, why don't you go and be an admin manager, and then you can manage a team there, and then maybe come back across to HR. And so I was horrified by it, and I was just like, you want me to leave my profession and go do a totally different role? So you will let me be a leader in that space, but not in my core profession. So, after that, I realised that probably wasn't the workplace for me, and so I went somewhere else, and eventually did get the opportunity to be a leader. Someone did back me in, but yeah, just I think when those things happen, just trust yourself on that, because if I had listened to that advice, I potentially could have lost my professional career, right?
Yeah.
Because things change like that, and it was all over, having aspirations to be a leader. So I think things have changed these days, but it was one that if I had believed that, I could have, done myself out of my profession a long time ago.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so that was that. In terms of good career advice, look, I've had lots of it. I think some things that resonate with me, and it took me a long time to really understand this, and probably part of doing equidi has been some of like the biggest career learning I've ever had. I now look back to when I was in corporate, I'm like, oh my God, imagine just having like a job again where you went to work, you did your job, you went home. That's amazing.
Just one thing to do, like one role.
Yeah, exactly right. And at the time, you're like stressed out. You're like, gosh. But I think the thing is, really just be yourself, and be unapologetically you. And so I always found, I loved HR, but what I found really hard about it was I am a people person, and it was so hard to have friends in the organisation like other people would, because from one day to the next, you don't know what's happening. They could be employed, they might not be employed the next day, and then you personally would feel awful. And so it always created this thin air between you and the business. And so what I've loved about later in my career, when you've got to where you want to go, and even what I'm doing with equidi, is that you can just be yourself and show up. And so I always encourage people to, trust yourself in terms of what you're doing, because for so many years I didn't trust myself, and I would just be like, oh, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. You know what, just focus on you and your role and do a good job, and it will come to you. But you've also got to advocate for yourself, because like I said, don't just sit there waiting for some manager to come and roll out a carpet for you. It might happen, but it generally doesn't. Go chase what you want, because it's there for you, if you put the work in and go get it.
Of that. That is just fabulous advice. Go chase what you want. Thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your expertise. I learned so much in our time together. It's been incredible. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm Dr. Nora Koslowski, co-founder of Even, where our mission is to accelerate women's economic potential. Check out even-careers.com to learn how we support women and business to get even.